Hello, Councilor Carpenter. Councilor Hightower, hi there. And Christine Curtis, you're with us as well.
I'm here, hello.
Hi there, hi everybody. We are about to commence this meeting of a duly warned meeting of the City Council Community Development and Neighborhood Revitalization Committee. This meeting is being held on Monday, November 30th. It is a little early for our committee, but we have other commitments that folks need to attend to. We're meeting at 4 p.m. and we are a few minutes past the starting time, but we will begin. Our focus, well, let's start out with approving our agenda. How about that? We have a proposed agenda here. Is there anybody, is there a motion to approve that proposed agenda?
I'll move that.
Councilor Carpenter moved. Councilor Hightower?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion or changes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. We have an agenda. Now for the fun. Our idea tonight is to do a very focused work session, which we have not discussed any of this in email or previous conversations other than the meetings that have happened at the City Council and the meetings that have happened for almost 12, well, for about 10 months in this committee, really, about the issue. So we are now having a chance to discuss some proposed exemptions that Councilor Carpenter feels are warranted and justified. And this is a chance to discuss those and to have hopefully a productive, honest, frank conversation about the pros and cons of each one of these. Does that sound like a good plan? Yeah.
Councilor Pine, I, at the 11th minute, emailed you all, and I don't know if Christine's had a chance to post it. My thoughts are just, I tried to gather everything together that we heard and discussed and put it down on a piece of paper. So I don't know if you want to start with that or just start more generally.
Well, I've had a busy day, and many of you probably have, but I haven't had a chance to look at what you sent.
Well, I just sent it, so.
Yeah, you just sent it minutes ago. So I want to make sure Christine got a chance to see it, and if Christine has it, if you could make it available to members of the public. I think we have about a dozen or so people who've joined us, and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to see that.
Yes, I put both documents up on the website.
Okay.
And I can share the website link in the chat bar right now.
That would be great.
And the one other thing that might be good for, that I think isn't posted, Christine, is my original amendment. So what we're working from right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know if you need me to send that.
Would you send that to me, please? And I'll post that right away.
Those are good pieces of work to get out on the table, just because I think that's a good, it keeps the conversation framed and focused on what we're trying to do here. So that's really helpful. So really our committee is tasked with essentially addressing some, what is fundamentally two different approaches. The way I'd like to frame it is, we have a desire to provide enough specificity in the question so the voters know what they're voting on, but yet also a desire to not put so much specificity into the charter change that gets then baked into our charter that would then require the city to do things that in the ordinance adoption process may prove not to be desirable or ideal. So I think that is our focus, is how to strike that balance, really, is how to get enough language in there that gives provides clarity to voters, and I believe that's important to do, and gives the city council, probably the future city council rather than this one, a chance to do their job of lawmaking in that process of creating an ordinance, which will happen. I do not expect the legislature, although it's possible, my experience over a few decades is they don't deal with bills like this when they come in early March. They like to have them for an entire session before they will dispense of them. And Councilor Carpenter maybe knows the same or different, but
Yeah.
yeah. So a likely scenario is, assuming this goes on the ballot and assuming the voters approve it, legislature gets it after town meeting day, and that's already crossover, I believe, is right around the town meeting, right?
Yeah, it's usually the week or two after that, but
Okay.
yeah.
So crossover, for those who don't know, means that the committee of jurisdiction that starts with the bill has debated and gotten a bill out of committee and onto the floor of either the House or the Senate, and then it goes to the other body. So it's a process that can take quite a while. So I think it's likely that this would not be addressed in a 2021 session, but in fact would get taken up for action in 2022. That's just based on my experience. Councilor Hightower. Yeah.
One clarification that I'd like to make is I think with the amendments that we're looking at now, it's a little less about specificity, because I think Sarah and I now have similar levels of specificity that, you know, we've kind of come to agreement to, and it's more about how held we are to those specifics. Might be a good way to frame that as well.
So that's a helpful difference or distinction to point out. That's actually a meaningful point too, because I think what we're trying to come up with is a recommendation to the full council that will win clearly a majority of support, and hopefully more than just a simple majority.
And along those lines, if I can keep, I don't want to get ahead of you or behind you, but I did have a chance to review the amendments that Sarah just sent. And I wonder, I feel like there might, I at least just before this meeting thought of a potential compromise. And I wonder if this would be a good time to introduce it early on.
Well, if you see some light at the end of the tunnel, please bring us right there.
Great, thanks. So the main argument that we've been having is around exemptions and whether we use the word shall or may for the exemptions. And I was wondering, and with the argument has been, I didn't want to use the word shall. I didn't mind listing some of them because I think there are kind of exemptions that, to Sarah's point, are common, but I wanted us to have freedom in how we implement them further down the road. And so we've been arguing about the word may or shall, and I wonder if we can keep the word shall, but if we could maybe change from reasonable exemptions to reasonable accommodations. I think that might give us a little bit more flexibility to, rather than saying you just don't have to do this, saying things like, oh, and I think Sarah maybe had this language earlier on, but I wonder if that would give us, and I would love to hear from, I don't know if we have any city attorneys on the call, but if that would give us the ability to have things like, yes, if you are trying to move your daughter in, you can do that, but then you might have to pay for the moving costs of your current tenants. And for us to have provisions like that, which I think just a straight exemption wouldn't allow us to do. So wondering, yeah, throwing that out there as a potential compromise.
Okay. Councilor Carpenter, is that something that you feel like you want to discuss a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the point of that paragraph in particular is, I mean, as we all have discussed, there are small owners and folks who really want to understand how to plan for the use of the property. So that's sort of the intent of that, and effectively that whole sentence, which lists them. So the question is, what does accommodation mean legally? So I think that is a good question to say. And I don't know that I can answer it off the top of my head. The point being, let me step back. I think we've said all along that, or I've said all along, these are baselines that in fact you could add more in charter, not charter, in ordinance. We just haven't delineated it one way or the other at this level.
There was a question raised, and I want to ask Jess Hyman to be enabled because Earhart asked, "Isn't fair housing law speaks about reasonable accommodation as a principle, it's a legal construct really?" And I want to just see if Jess thinks that it is a phrase that can be. I guess we could you could do some wordsmithing to make it not the same word, maybe. What do you think?
Let's see, I'm not looking at the proposed wording right now. So would you mind repeating it for me? And I'd be happy to give my feedback.
Yeah, and I can post it into the thing as well. So we're specifically talking about this paragraph in the chat about what will be excluded from just cause. And I'm very worried about using the words excluded and shall together, because I feel like that doesn't give us a lot of flexibility in how we implement it. And so I was wondering if we could specifically change reasonable exemptions from this provision shall be provided for properties that include but are not limited to list to something else. And it sounds like reasonable accommodations may not be that, but
yeah, I think if just using the term reasonable accommodations is too similar to the language used under fair housing law, so I think that might be confusing for people. But I think I like the way you're thinking about the change in the language. I just don't think that that's the right word to use.
I guess we'll do a quick synonym search on Google. Tell us what word gets us close to reasonable accommodation. Honestly, I don't know how else to, because I think that the direction we're going is one that may get us there. I just would ask if you still have concern, Councilor Hightower, because I think I do, that a shall still locks us in a little bit more than we want.
I would rather not say. I would rather have my, of course, my amendments pass as they are. I can't support Sarah's language as she kind of gave it back to us. And so I'm definitely looking for a compromise somewhere in there. I think if it's something about we can accommodate, like that the ordinance will allow for folks to move their families in, whether it's like, you might have to wait, or you might have to like give the tenant some financial like buffering, I think would make me comfortable enough, as long as it's clear in the charter change that we have the authority to regulate that.
I see. So it's really just that provision too, just about moving your family and you're moving on. That's what you're, right?
No, I think it's, let me look at the list right quick. I think the one that I'm the least worried, the one, I guess it's really a spectrum to me. And so the one that I'm least worried about is sublets and in-unit rentals, in terms of, I think that's kind of an exemption that could just be that could really truly be an exemption to me, and that's on one spectrum. And then the family one is the one that I'm most worried about in terms of, not in terms of it being an exemption. So I wouldn't say that it's the only one. I would say it's the one that I'm most worried about. So I'm trying to find a way to make all of them more flexible, but.
Well, Councilor Carpenter, I do hear what Councilor Hightower is saying, and you know that she and I have, I don't know if we have any daylight between us on this. So I'll just say I'd like to find a way, but I'd like to hear your latest language, because that would be helpful to know what you feel it achieves in terms of moving us closer to consensus.
Well, I mean, I'm just sort of reading and rereading it. And I don't, the point that I'm trying to drive home here, and we heard from lots of people, is I own this building. I need and want to be able to plan for what I can do with it reasonably. And then it lists the building types or situations where the owner of the building may be exempt from this provision. And we took, so sublets and unit rentals, which are really sub-rentals, so they're kind of a different category. I think we had all agreed that 1 to 3 unit owner occupied units, we would be willing to consider an exemption from because of the proximity of the other person in the building. With skipping over family, withdrawn from the rental market and in need of renovation. I mean, those are provisions. Well, let me step back. All 5 of those provisions are really very common in all of the ordinances that I've read. There are municipalities or jurisdictions that have relocation assistance as part of their ordinances, and that's effectively what you're talking about. I mean, there's notice provisions, sort of adequate, which is actually addressed below. So be mindful. And again, maybe we need a little legal work on this. Is it says it will set the notice provisions consistent with state law, and some are already set in state law, but these would be new state law, so presumably there would be different notice, or could be different notice provisions. I mean, I don't think the concept that Councilor Hightower is talking about is a problem. I'm still, to be honest, perplexed that there's concern about the provision about owner and immediate family moving in. I did, for clarity, add that they would have to certify that, so that would be, they'd have to attest that's what's happening. I mean, it can't be just a whim, but we heard a lot from people that really have that concern. They want to be able to know if their son can live there, their mother can move in, and the large landlords, I don't see them moving in. I mean, they're just not going to move in their own building.
Right. Yeah. What I hear, though, and I agree with this idea, is we should build in some protection so that even if that is allowable, there's some attempt to compensate for relocation, right? And we have that, by the way, in city ordinance now. If an apartment in Burlington is declared unfit for habitation by code enforcement, for any reason, the tenants get relocation assistance by law. And that is either provided by the owner or the city provides it and gets reimbursed with a lien on the property. So relocation is a benefit, or is a protection, so that tenants are not harmed when a property is deemed unfit for human habitation. So in this case, we'd be offering the same type of relocation assistance, and it would just literally line up, I think, with that relocation is what I understand Councilor Hightower put out on the table, right? Does that sound accurate? Is that right?
I mean, perhaps that should go in as somewhere in there, that we may be able to require that or propose it, or.
Yeah, I think that I agree. Again, this was me spitballing what the things are that we might want to do in implementation that the proposed amendments would not let us do. I'm not necessarily that those are, I don't want us to put everything into, like, I don't want us to put right now what those things are. So I don't think we should add, oh, these are the ways that we could like help mitigate that.
Why do you think it would prohibit that?
If you say you shall be exempt, because then you're exempt. We can't then turn around and say, oh, but we still want you to support in these ways because you're exempt. Why would you? I think they would, I definitely think that would be legally contested if we said, oh, but actually you have to do this thing. They would go to the charter change and say, or the charter and say, you don't have the authority to make me do that because I'm exempt from this provision.
Mhm. So if there is a way, and I think the way to get us at least to give the voters some sense of direction, and sometimes legislative intent is I think an important concept here. And by going to the voters with a question that has some parameters, but that doesn't lock us in and tie our hands, does at least give, I think, legislative intent to both the voter, the legislature, and then back to the feedback loop, back to the city council when we are in the task of developing the ordinance. I think it's fair that it's essentially a direction coming from the way we've phrased the question, but it's not so binding that it really limits what the city can actually do. And that I think there's real value there that yeah.
I mean, I appreciate, and I've said this before, that people would like it simple. But if you're the property owner today or tomorrow, you want to go buy a piece of property and you're thinking, I'm going to use this for my retirement or my son. I might live there, I might not, you need to understand that. You need to know that now. And, I know that there's some perceived risk that will be abused. But again, it's in my conversations with the other states, that was just not an area that came up that was being abused. I mean, I think the concept of any of this, related to notice is something we can work on. We've left ourselves some room to do that. We haven't talked about compensation, and I don't read exemption as meaning you couldn't have things by definition. I mean, these all are going to have to be defined. What's a sublet, what's an in-unit rental, it's all got to be sort of fleshed out. And that's sort of the purpose of the reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Quick thoughts, and one thing I did just want to flag, the owner occupied duplex and triplexes, Sarah just said that we agreed on leaving those out for the reasons of them being in the same house. Just want to clarify, that wasn't my reason, but
Okay.
That's just a minor point. The other thing is, I'm not arguing for simplicity here. I do think that is an argument, but that's not the argument that I'm making. I think you're wrong, and I think Brian is agreeing with me, is that if we put "you shall be exempt," we don't have the authority to go back and say, but we still want you to do this. You are saying we're not regulating you. We're saying we don't have the power to regulate you in our charter. And so I don't think that this is the same at all as a state doing this, or a city that doesn't have a charter-based kind of mechanism having exemptions in the same way, because we would literally be hamstringing ourselves to say we cannot regulate this. So I understand that these are exemptions. Nobody is saying these can't be exemptions in Burlington. That's never the argument that I've made. It's that if we're putting it in the charter change as a shall be excluded, we're not giving ourselves any give to change how we're implementing that without a 2 or 3 year leeway time. So this isn't about simplicity. This is just about governance and how we govern this. And the other places, yes, it happens. Yes, these are exemptions are in other places, but they don't have this hamstring up, and we can't change how we do that.
Well, I mean, they have to go back to their state legislature. So I can't opine how easy it is or it isn't to get a fix in any of those state legislatures, but for them to change it, they've got to go back to the full body of their legislature and change it. So it may or may not be easy to do, I can't say, but it's probably a similar process to fix it.
I feel like I'm proposing a lot of compromises and I'm not getting a lot in return.
Well, I mean, I tried through reordering language and trying to be more specific, but I get back to this fundamental problem of, you know, if you're an owner of a property, you need to know if you're covered or not by this provision. And so that's what we're trying to accommodate here. And I also appreciate that people think that's too broad and that people do not want to accommodate some of those property owner situations. But, you know, for me, if we get down to the ordinance level, I would still want that in there. And so I'm not afraid of it. Now, adding, and I haven't wrapped my head around this, and actually I'm thinking a little bit out loud, but, you know, like for instance, the ordinance that we have on the, Brian, the one that you referenced on if the building is not up to code and all that good stuff. How did we do that? Would we do that by ordinance or did we do it by charter?
We have pretty broad police powers when it comes to housing quality standards, so we did it through ordinance. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't want to interrupt you, but I do feel like I have to say what I'm thinking, which is, I don't want to mislead people. I want to sort of manage public expectations. So to say that we're telling them now what's definitely going to be in the ordinance isn't fair either, because the legislature can take this and completely rework what we come up with.
mm-hmm.
It's their law. When they pass it, it's not our bill anymore. It becomes a legislative bill. They can get rid of all kinds of provisions. So they go in, the voter goes to the booth, and the person who owns the duplex or triplex goes into this process thinking they know. And then the legislature kicks out a bill in 2 years or a year and a half and says, guess what? It's totally different than what you approved. So that's a risk. And I think that risk is real.
But we don't have to enact that. I mean, that's the premise we've had all along. I mean, if the legislature mucks it up too much,
True.
we don't have to adopt it. We've asked their permission. We hope they'll stick close to the words we give them. But if they muck it up, we don't have to adopt it. We'd be back to the drawing board. So I guess that's less of my worry. It's more of, can we go in with these baseline provisions for the property owner? And if it's being abused all over the place, I mean, there's a couple different fixes. One would be to rescind it. The other would be to try to get the provision around whether you can add other accommodations, like, you know, further notice or that kind of thing. So again, I'm not sure how, you know, we have some other provisions with notice changes. Were those all done by charter?
No, we were deemed not to have the authority to handle the issue of how much notice a tenant gets for a rent increase or for a termination. So that was done by going to the legislature. We had to do that. So yes, we did have to change our charter for that. Yeah. And because those were fairly discrete ideas and proposals that dealt with a specific issue, it was much easier to put it to a question. I see a comment here from Stephen. He has it in quotes, and I don't know if that means he's offering it in quotes or if it's actually being quoted from a source. So this gives, I see it's suggested language. I see. Got it. Okay. The city may, under its powers, make exceptions to protect the viability of owner-occupied properties with up to 3 units. That deals with that issue. What do you think about using that as a way to address some of the other issues?
I guess I want to hear from, because I'm not sure Sarah specifically responded to, I understand, like, we're still back to, we're not disagreeing on the exceptions necessarily. I'm not even disagreeing on the family exception. It's just how tightly bound we are to exempting people versus regulating what that looks like. And I heard that, and I definitely was not married to the language of like reasonable accommodation, but if we could have just a change in phrase from exemptions to something like will provide reasonable pathways or whatever.
Well, what about regulation, reasonable regulation?
That doesn't bother me, but I don't know. It's more that I don't know if that would get at what you want. If we're saying we'll reasonably regulate these things.
I think it's actually, it gets us right, the ability to regulate, right? So it does keep it available to us, which is, I think, addressing your concern that we are losing that ability with the other language.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just be mindful, we're talking about a fairly, I mean, it's the provision obviously related to termination of the lease. So that's what we're exempting them from, that in those circumstances, termination of lease, those property types, would be, they would not be subject to that provision about termination of the rental agreement.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Well, I mean, it is specific to that provision of expiration of the rental agreement. So, I mean, that is, I guess, the gut of it, but
I think that distinction, I mean, that, pointing clarification is helpful, but it doesn't really change. It doesn't change anything, I don't think. There is no word that lands us between shall and may. There's no compromise word, I'm afraid.
No, so I think it has to be on whether or not they're an exception or a
potential exception, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. I just threw out the word potential. What if it said?
well, I think that's the same as may.
All right, I was being sneaky. You're right.
I think it's okay to have something in there that says we will regulate them differently than the other ones. But the way that you are currently proposing the language, Sarah, I really do think we're saying we won't regulate them. They'll just be excluded. And I can't, I think, Brian, I know I can't support that. And
I'm not getting there either. So we're not seeking just to get a simple committee majority. We're trying to come back with something that that can garner enough support to get on the ballot and have enough support that councilors will say to their constituents, we would urge you to support this. And we were so close.
Well, and I understand there's a whole universe of ways to approach this, but allowing those specific property types to be exempt from the non-renewal of lease. It doesn't cover every situation for sure, but it's intended, we can have a just cause ordinance that covers, arbitrary and capricious terminations. The gut of what we heard from folks like Legal Aid was this is often used in retaliatory situations where there's discrimination. And I mean, you have to work harder. I suppose it could still be that if you're proposing any of these others. I mean, if the only way you can get rid of somebody is to draw your whole unit from the market, that's fairly extreme. Units in need of substantial renovation that preclude occupancy, that would, they have to prove that. I mean, the point of this is they'd have to prove these things. That's wherein I added the owner and immediate family certifies. That's intended to be proof. So you're going to have to work hard to get one of these exemptions, I think, if you got to prove it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't include all situations. Some people will be asked to leave for no cause in these certain circumstances. But the goal is to reduce and prohibit more of the circumstances where it's either retaliatory, where it's discriminatory, where it's simply, I don't like the way you look, kind of stuff. And I'd rather have that young college student in my apartment. It just doesn't cover everything, I get it, but I feel like for those small owners that are concerned, we need to provide those protections. And I don't think it doesn't cover everything, but I don't think these are unreasonable.
We're not disagreeing on that point at all. We're saying they can have exemptions and these are reasonable. I think we're saying that the language as you're proposing it is going too far and saying we can't then regulate them in the way that we want. It's not that we're not disagreeing with you on those points.
How would you further regulate them? I guess I'm not sort of seeing that. I mean,
I think it's things like saying things about the notice period without needing to go back to the thing. It's going back to things like, oh, you might have to provide moving expenses. Those are the two examples that I just thought of, but I don't think that would be the exhaustive list, potentially, depending on the situation. But I think in the future we would want to have the ability to change things like that.
Well, the last sentence in that paragraph is intended to deal with adequate notice. So it's for the paragraph above, and maybe it's not written right. It's intended to say, any termination of tenancy shall include adequate notice. And then in the paragraph below, we say that the ordinance will define adequate notice consistent with state and federal law, or state and city law. So some things we already have notice for. And then I am meaning this to read that in addition, the ordinance can put in other notice periods.
I like that. You use the word can put them in, but if you use that for the other exemptions, I think we'd be able to call this meeting to conclusion, right? Because you just said, so anyway, I think it's really the locking us in, Sarah. That's what I hear is the issue that we're debating now. So it's not.
And I guess it is in a fashion locking us in the sense that it says to me, if this passes, and if we choose to do it, and if we no longer allow termination of the lease as a trigger for being asked to leave an apartment, then this group of people will not be asked to participate. And I, at the end of the day, don't see myself supporting an ordinance that had this, the same thing. I want, the family thing to be in an ordinance as well.
Yeah, we may
So-
agree on 4 out of 5 exemptions, but right now, if we put them all in, we're locked into doing them all, though, right?
And not just exempt, and to me, the thing is an exemption versus a like, you get to do this, but we might ask a few things in return.
Sure.
I'm worried about that we can't say, but you have to do a few things in return. That's what I'm worried about. I'm not disagreeing on the exemptions. I'm disagreeing on the but. Like, I want us to be able to say but. And I don't think I have the chance, like the future council has a chance to say but with the way that we're doing this. And I can't support something where the council can't say, but then you have to.
That's a really good question. We don't have an attorney on the call that I know of. And I didn't request the city attorney's presence. I apologize for that. I could try Eileen right now. She's probably still in her office.
I think it'd be worth it.
Okay.
And while we do that, Earhart and I trying to come up with another compromise.
I'm going to step off for like 2 minutes to try and get Eileen.
Okay.
Sounds great. Threw another potential compromise into the chat, which maybe means that your exemptions get to stay, but that we're saying there's a but. And I don't know if that would work. But again, I feel like you keep arguing for that there should be exemptions, and I don't think I'm arguing against you, but I don't feel like you're hearing me on just because you get to move in doesn't mean that there's not stuff the city will ask you to do, and how do we make sure we have that authority?
Maybe not well crafted, but I feel like we tried to address notice.
I don't think,
So-
to me, it's not just notice. I don't know if notice is the only thing that I want. I don't know if it is. Yeah, I don't know if it is just notice.
I'm afraid that was not successful, but if Christine, if you have a minute, can you at least send an email to City Attorney Blackwood, letting her know that if she's available for a quick check-in, a consult, we'd love to have her available to us. So. There's a suggestion that we ask Gene Bergman to weigh in. That would be helpful if, Zoraida, do you want to ask Gene if he can weigh in?
Yeah, I'll call right quick.
He's not on this meeting, is he?
I don't think so.
No, okay. We're going to take a minute just because I'd rather not have committee discussion with only 2 of us in the room. So I'm going to take a minute to get a bite here.
Okay, so I have Gene via phone. He's working on something else for council, so he was hoping we could just quickly ask Brian if you want to pose the question.
Sure. Hi, Gene.
Hi, Brian. Hi,
Thanks for joining us with no notice at all. I appreciate that. That is public service,
I
man.
don't know if I can be any help, but if I can be, it'll be a pleasure.
Okay. So the question we're asking, or we're debating it for this discussion around just cause eviction, is if the city council puts a question to the voters that essentially says, this ordinance won't apply to the following, and it lists the situations that it won't apply to. And then when we begin making the law or the ordinance, if we decide that we would like to add some, for instance, like relocation assistance or compensation when an owner has to terminate their lease for any of these reasons that are now exempted, could we then throw in a requirement, or would that be in violation of a charter change that didn't include those requirements in it?
There's a general legal construction that says that you've got powers that are necessary, to do the things that the statute, that the law says that you can do. And if you do those, then you'll be okay. So for example, and Brian, I think you were on the council at the time, the registration fee is not in any statutory language. There's nothing that gives us the power to charge a registration fee. And so our good friend Steve Pollack and a number of others sued the city, saying that it was illegal because the statute didn't allow for it. And the city only has the powers that that are given by the statute. And the city fought that. It was like in 1991. And we won because the registration fee was necessary, and the registration was necessary to be able to do the things that the law allowed us to do. So if you're close to what the law is allowing you to do, and it's necessary to accomplish it, the law doesn't have to say that it is going to be part of it. But if you start to move away from that, then the law is gonna look for something to say that you've got that authority. It's very similar to the conversations that I've had with the committee and others about the issues with suspension, and whether we actually have authority to do that based on the statutory requirements. So in your case, if you are saying we're going to exclude the certain things from being
Regulated.
I mean, ultimately, you are basically saying that something is or is not just cause, right? I mean, it's always, this language was kind of hard for me to be working through. If something is going to be considered just cause, like I'm moving back into an apartment, or my brother is coming to live with me, my elderly father is coming to live in the second unit in my duplex, and you were to say, okay, that's not that you're allowed to do that, then, and you're laying that out, then it would seem to me that because you're regulating the the eviction process in that by saying that that is going to be allowable under this scheme, that you arguably can then put in protections to deal with the displacement of people that you are saying are going to be allowed to be displaced within that context. Does that all make sense?
Yes, that does. I think that's the answer to the question. And we just happen to have the benefit of the current city attorney who just joined us by phone. So I was going to ask her if she heard the question. I don't think she's heard the question. So yep.
I'm only a former senior assistant city attorney, so you have your own legal advice. I have a pro bono emeritus status, which means I get to advise people for free when I'm doing this legal advice, and I've given you my legal advice under that really high rate of 0, sort of like the ACA penalty if you don't pay for health insurance.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Gene. That's really helpful. And we would love you to stay on, but we understand you're in the middle of some other business. So if you have to hop off.
If somebody can get back to me at some point to tell me whether the city attorney agreed with me or not, I always like to check, because lawyers do that.
I'm happy to do that.
Look at your texts later.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye. Eileen, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Okay. So the gist of the question, I believe, is if we were to exempt certain situations, for instance, from just cause, that a owner of a property has a grown son or daughter or child that wants to move back home, and this is the only place they could put them, and they say we allow that, and we put that into the charter change, and it gets approved by the legislature, becomes part of our charter. When we go to create the ordinance, would we also be able to add provisions that essentially give the tenant such things as maybe advance notice? Could we give things like payment for relocation expenses? Could we give them maybe the first month's rent in the new unit? Could we do anything like that? Or do we have to put that in the charter change?
I think you could do something like notice. I don't think you could require payment because you're not authorized to do that. There's no authority from the state for the city to require a landlord to pay anything to somebody. Right.
Okay.
And then if I can ask a follow-up question based on that, Eileen, is if we don't allow just cause, but we put something in that says like I guess because I guess maybe I can give you my intent and then you can tell me what language would be best rather than me telling you what legally I'm trying to do, is we want to mention these exemptions, I think, is to give voters in the state a sense of what is exempt in other places, what we intend to do. But I want to make sure that we can do things later on, like say, okay, you can evict someone if you give X notice and pay this. Like what language will we have to put in to give ourselves the right to do that?
I think you would have to, so for example, if you have a list of exemptions, I think you would have to have something that, the first part would be you'd have to have something that said, including but not limited to.
Mm-hmm.
So that let open the ability to have other exemptions, number one. And then secondly, if what you want to do is impose some condition that is not otherwise a part of the landlord-tenant laws generally, like requiring someone to pay someone, you would have to specifically include that in the charter change. So, one way I guess would be to say, exemptions may be conditioned on and I probably would go ahead and mention on notice requirements, payment of relocation costs, relief from rent during, you know, time searching, or things, or, you know, I'm not sure you could do a general catch-all if you were trying to get something like requiring someone to pay something, because that's the kind of thing I think you would have to have some kind of language that authorized that specifically.
I mentioned earlier, Eileen, that we do have something. It rarely gets invoked, but if the city declares a unit unfit for habitation, the ordinance does actually require the landlord to pay relocation of that tenant. And the city hasn't had to use it much, but it's been there, and we've used it a few times in my knowledge. And it's really there as a fail-safe, because in most of these instances, the owner is recalcitrant and refuses to pay it. And so the city covers that cost and puts a lien on their property, is how that gets accomplished. But it's in our ordinance right now for housing inspection, housing quality standards.
And that may be slightly different, because I have to go back and look at the authorizing language for minimum housing, which I believe allows you to have kinds of penalties and other kinds of things, but this wouldn't be covered under that, and that's why I'm thinking you probably have to have specific authorizing language. So I mean, you know, maybe it would be enough for it to be general, to say that something general, to say the exemptions may also include notice, payment, penalty provisions, or something, you know, listing a few if you could come up with some general language for the kinds of things that you want to include. I would just add a sentence in the charter change that authorized.
Okay, would it also be advisable to include this charter change language as being an amendment to Chapter 18, which is the housing section of the Code of Ordinances? Would that get us to the ability that's already embedded in Chapter 18 for another article in Chapter 18?
So I don't know that you have to specifically reference charter. I'm not sure if I understood your question, but I'm not sure you actually have to reference the Code of Ordinances. I think the charter language can give you broad general authorization, and you can decide whether it goes in Chapter 18 or somewhere else.
Right. Okay.
Can I point out
wants to say something with Eileen here, Sarah? Should she say?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Eileen, we have a sentence after the exemptions. It says all termination of tenancy shall include adequate notice to tenants. And then further down it says the ordinance shall define what is unreasonable and adequate notice, consistent with state and federal law defining just cause. So the point being that we could, and it may not be well written, was that we could add notice requirements for things that are not already addressed in state law. Some things are addressed in state law and some are not.
Right.
And I would just toss out that more generally on the compensation, I mean, I think the term in the industry is relocation expenses. So I don't know that we have to be so detailed. I mean, I think that term relocation expenses is defined and often could cover a month's rent, could cover moving, you know, it's a term that's used enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
that. I mean, there could be. I think it would be a general enough term that you could then define it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you could use that as charter language, relocation expenses, and that would be essentially giving you the authority then to define what those relocation expenses consist of.
Well, if we add a sentence that says, so all termination of tenancy shall include adequate notice, which we can define, and may include relocation expenses or something like that.
Something like that. That sounds right.
Okay. since Eileen is in the middle of mediation over a city issue she's dealing with, do we want to let her go, or do we want to ask her to stay?
Well, we're getting darn close. We need her expertise tomorrow. So maybe, not specifically, but before Thursday, we can talk it out, and maybe that tidying up the termination with adequate notice,
Mhm.
and then adding that we may charge relocation expenses.
Councilor Hightower, are you settled with where we're at as far as Eileen? Can we let her back to her mediation, or do you want to ask her anything?
I think we're settled. I do, I guess we'll have enough time now because we've got a week between now and then that we can have her look at it and come to, and, you know, provide feedback before it comes to the full council.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I may have another break in my mediation. If you guys want to, send me something now, that's fine too. I've got that my mediation's reconvening right now, so I need to get back to it. But if I have another break, I can look at it this evening if that works for you too. So just let me know.
Sounds good. We look forward to hearing how the mediation goes. And mediation by Zoom sounds like a tricky thing.
Yeah.
That's fun. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We heard it from Eileen that there's some flexibility. There's language needed. We would need to put in something in order to accomplish.
Well, if we, after that third paragraph, all termination of tenancy shall include adequate notice, which I think we all agree with. And then we go down about adequate notice, and may include payment of relocation expenses.
So I wonder, and again, Brian, not meaning to, but I do wonder, I think we're getting somewhere. I wonder if it would be worth me sharing my screen, incorporating each one of like Sarah's changes as talking through it. Sarah, what you just said, I didn't capture it like that. I did it based on the language that I'd sent earlier for Earhart and I. So I'm okay with changing it to exemptions and shall, based on what Eileen just said. If we say something like, these exemptions will not restrict the city from crafting ordinance provisions that mitigate potential negative impact on tenants and property owners through adequate notice and relocation expenses, or something like that. Happy to, again, change that, but that we're starting to get at.
Okay.
So is that an okay way to approach it? Because I know we've got about 25 minutes left until.
I think for the time being,
I think it's heading in the right direction. I do think, yeah. I was thinking about this when Eileen said this. When you say shall include but not be limited to, is there a way to create the flexibility the other way that says, I guess you'd have to say may include. In that case, you don't need much, but that shall not be limited to. Yeah, I mean, I do worry we're tying our hands and we're going to look back and go, darn, why did we do that? And we're going to send our city lobbyists back down to Montpelier to try and figure out if we can fix this.
I mean, we can always make a mistake, but there's, 4 states and 25 communities that have most of these. And I mean, it's not perfect, and it's not perfect from either side, depending on what side you're on the question. And we might want to change it in 5 years from now, but I feel like for now, it's a brand new concept in a single city, in the single state of Vermont. There's nobody else to talk to about this. But these are exemptions we need to create.
Mhm.
Now I'm just reading the sentence you have. Shall not. Okay, yeah. It's relocation. I think you got an extra syllable.
Oh.
Reallocation, I like that.
Reallocation.
That's nice. Reallocation of wealth, right? No.
There you go.
Oh my bad. Sorry. Did that.
Well, if the United States
We've
of
come out.
America social housing policy, we wouldn't have to be talking about this. But
Yeah. The federal government's once had a goal to house all people. Like that was an actual stated goal of like, I don't know, this Housing Act of 1949, Sarah, is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Or maybe
Imagine that a federal government that actually took that interest in its people. So do we all want to spend a minute reading this and making sure that this is heading in the direction?
Mhm.
and this doesn't include your changes yet, Sarah, so we can talk through those.
I think that's pretty good wordsmithing for now.
Mhm.
What would we need to change to satisfy to get you on board, Sarah?
I mean, the whole concept is something I've not really discussed with anybody else, so that's kind of, I mean, and I've agreed, and I hope everybody agrees all along, a notice, the concept of a relocation, and maybe we just put in reasonable there.
I'm sorry, say it again. Where?
So from crafting reasonable or adequate notice and reasonable relocation expenses.
Sure, we may argue over what's reasonable, but that's okay.
We're going to argue that about 3 or 4 times in this. I mean, I'm okay with that for now. Like I said, I've got no feedback, and I think we need to get some fine tuning from Eileen.
Okay, and then I'm okay to put in, sorry, so this was the way that I had it. The city by ordinance may also provide that just causes the expiration of a written rental agreement for properties that yada yada. And this is the way that Sarah wanted to change it. So
The reason I put that in there is I just feel like we weren't being clear enough. I don't think it changes the intent.
I agree.
It was just to say up front and center that just ending the lease is not grounds for terminating your tenancy. So I didn't.
That was the idea. Yeah.
I didn't think it's not intended to change anything. I was just trying to be more clear.
So, sorry, looking at the chat, and I agree, I'm okay with it. Brian, what did you say?
Well, the way you have it worded now, I'm good with it because it gives us the flexibility. But I think what Sarah is asking for is that paragraph that starts with the city by ordinance may, will have to say, to get Sarah's support, shall, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're still back to the may versus the shall is what we're at. Yeah. It's been asked why we need to include 2 provisions, C, which is being withdrawn from the rental market, and D, in need of substantial renovations which preclude occupancy.
I think it's signaling. I mean, I hear the point that it's obvious, but I think part of this is to help people who haven't thought about this as much as all of us have know what our intent is. So I think it's much more about signaling than it is about clarifying. I don't know if you all agree with
Yeah, I guess I'm still confused about.
Why is it being asked? It's being asked, do we need these? Are these obvious, or are they even, I believe it could be asked, are these actually things that we should include as just causes, is what I read it as. So Stephen Marshall sent the question. Maybe he'll send a clarification if you could in the chat. That would be helpful for our discussion.
Well, I mean, I understand people don't think it's necessary, but I think what Captain Hightower said, I think we need to be clear.
Sorry, changes based on Era. Hart just suggested that we write it like this instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. There's a sort of a perspective that Stephen's offering to us that these can be included in the ordinance because he thinks they're common sense. But I think the problem with one person's notion of common sense is not
Right.
another. So I think the idea is to be explicit at this point. What I just want to ask, and I have to say because I think I know the answer, but I just want to say the way I understand the charter change is by bringing this language with the ordinance shall, that once the ordinance is being developed, that's like baseline. You start with those as like, you can't deviate from that, right?
Mhm.
It is true. Okay.
I mean, that's my understanding, and I totally get the philosophical point of view that people would like that to be more open-ended, but I also get that property owners and voters want to understand what the baseline is.
Mhm.
I mean, the only other option we'd have, so to speak, would be to write the whole ordinance first and then reference adoption of that. But we've all agreed that we didn't want to do it that way. So
That would delay us by another 2 years probably. So
Yeah.
that's not going to get us where we want to get.
So Sarah, for Brian's benefit, because you didn't have the chance to read your changes before, do you want to go through anything else?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
want?
So this is your ordinance, your, what you wrote.
Resolution.
I don't know if it's easier to put up what I sent you, or is
So what you sent is, I have it next to me so I can copy paste it as you say it, but I think we
okay.
can talk through it.
Well, okay. So the first paragraph, sort of divided in paragraphs. There was a comment that the addition of give the power to provide by ordinance conditions under which evictions may occur and may prohibit was just might be overly broad for the legislature, but I'm fine with leaving it and duke it out with them. And paragraph 2, what I added was there's I mean, there's some wording differences. They're not major. I'm aware. I just have to, my eyes are so quick. That's essentially the D is what I added, and it was sort of a combo of language that had been talked about. And that is really based on landlords need to know if someone's going to renew the lease or not. And if they're not going to renew it, then that is grounds to terminate the tenancy.
Brian, did you have thoughts on that? Because I don't know if I've heard your opinion on this specific change.
Well, it gets complicated to me because what it does is it raises this issue, which have been raised with us as counselors, that some rental property owners are putting in this requirement that you must tell them like some ridiculous amount of time beforehand that whether you're moving in or whether you're renewing your lease or not. But that's like I don't even know if it's allowable, but it's happening where owners are putting in a lease provision that says you basically have to tell us 9 months before your lease expires if you're going to renew. And what would be the time period? Is it what's the time, whatever is required by law, Sarah? Is that what you're asking for?
Well, this is intended for regional changes so you're in a lease today, and then the landlord says, fine, you want to stay, here's your new lease. Your new lease says, your rent's raised by $50 and you got to pay for the water for the washing machine. It's intended to say, and you need to give your landlord a notice. Like, you can't just I might take the apartment, I might not take the apartment. So the point is, If you don't want to re-rent it, then you need to tell the landlord, I'm not going to re-rent it. Now, reasonable is one of our time. You know, if we determine it's not reasonable to have to give 9 months notice, but it's reasonable to give 3 months notice, that's what we'd have to sort of duke out in this.
Not now, though, in the ordinance.
Right.
Okay, I'm okay with that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we want to keep this, or what's the consensus?
Well, I do.
I hear that. I hear that.
Well, I think it's important in the student rental market. You know, I mean, we hear the stories about the 9 months notice, but we also hear the stories around people, you know, sort of diddling and daddling, and I think I'm going to rent it. Sure, I'm going to take it, and then at the 11th hour, no, I got a better deal, you know, with my friend. And so it's just to clarify that if you send your notice in 3 months ahead of time or whatever's reasonable, and you say, I'm not going to rent it, the landlord has the right to rent it to somebody else.
Isn't that true now under state landlord-tenant law?
It may be. I think it's just clarifying it.
So it's been suggested that it is part of law, and it is also something where this language that we have in front of us is perhaps not as well crafted as it could be.
Well, I'm willing to.
That's the kind of thing the city attorney would correct for us.
If it's better in, it's better written, then that's, my intent is that the landlord be able to know if he can re-rent it or not re-rent it.
Okay. And someone did point out that if the tenant gives notice that they're staying and they want to continue 3 months or 2 months before, and then they change their mind, they're actually still bound to honor the lease. I believe they are. Yeah. And then they have to find a subletter or do something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a suggestion for some wording that came through the chat that is much simpler. Essentially saying the city will regulate renewal provisions or requirements or something.
Well, I don't know that that's what we've asked for. We just, I mean, that might be a thing to ask for, but that's not, I don't think we're asking for that.
That's not what you're asking for. Okay.
I'm just saying, pointing out that non-renewal of a lease is reason to terminate a tenant.
Okay.
Okay, so I've just included this as a comment to the city attorney. Lease is a reason to terminate tenancy. Okay.
Thank you, Zara. I appreciate that.
No worries.
What's next, Sarah? I want to keep us on track because we have 40 minutes before you have to disappear and turn into a pumpkin.
Yes. Okay. So now we're in the third paragraph, and I added what I thought was more clarifying language, that, and this is really the gut, that we may exclude from just cause reasons the expiration of rental agreement as a sole grounds for tenancy of termination of tenancy. And I just wanted to say it clearly. That's all. Maybe it's a redundant sentence, but I want everyone to understand that's what we're saying.
Okay.
And then I go into reasonable exemptions from that provision, that is the provision of terminating your tenancy by ending the lease, may include, well, I said shall, shall be provided for properties that include, I don't know if you want to put that whole sentence in there. So after reasonable exemptions from this provision shall be provided for properties that include, but are not limited to, sublets, in-unit rentals, owner-occupied duplexes and triplexes, and accessory dwelling units. Somebody suggested we just might say 1 to 3 unit buildings, which either is fine with me. Units where the owner and immediate family certifies they're moving in, units being withdrawn from the rental market, units of substantial renovations that preclude occupancy.
Brian, waiting for your thoughts.
Well, the may versus the shall is, you know, I still really struggle with what we're doing to restrict our future ability as a lawmaking body to make a good law. So I just have to say that, and I don't know how else to phrase that as just a matter of sort of public policy. I understand the desire to give as much certainty and clarity. I also want everybody to know that by doing it, is if we do it with shall, we're still not giving people any clarity or certainty, because the legislature could completely rework what we give them, even if it wins overwhelmingly by the voters. The legislature is free to say, yeah, you know what, Burlington, they already did this with gun control. We don't really like what you're coming up with. We're going to kill it, or we're going to change it so badly that you won't recognize it when it comes back. Right?
But we don't have to adopt it. So
Right.
That's at the end of the day, if that happens, we're back to square one. So
Although if the only thing they did was change shall to may, we would just do it. How do you feel about this language? It has neither shall nor may.
You found language that doesn't have either one?
I mean, but it still has it. It's more a shall than it is a may.
which one are we talking about
Which
there?
paragraph now are we in? The one that's highlighted?
Yeah.
Okay. Resolution exemptions include, oh, I see. Yeah. That's an interesting idea. You're actually taking out the mandatory or optional. There was full optionality before versus Sarah's, which is fully mandatory. You're kind of staying silent on it. Huh.
Well, it says may. It doesn't say shall. So.
No, this is for your.
No, just this part.
Oh, that one. Okay.
May covers that part, and then the new sentence is reasonable exemptions for this provision include, but are not limited to these properties. I mean, I guess they'd probably construe that to mean the same as shall, right? Probably.
Yes.
I'm no lawyer and I don't play one, and I'm not gonna, but yeah. You know, I don't want this thing to die. I feel like we've put a lot of effort into it. I've gotten a surprising number of, there's support for it and there's opposition to it. I'm not surprised, because when it was voted on 32 years ago, this, you know, November, it was 48 in favor, 48% in favor, 52 against. It was a very close vote. And I appreciate the sentiment of what Councilor Carpenter is doing, which is to give the voters enough certainty of what we're going to come back with, what we're going to do with an ordinance, because we actually did get criticized badly. I think we lost largely because people said, you're kind of asking for a blank check, and we, the voters, aren't comfortable with that. So that was an attack from the opponents, was this is a blank check. You haven't provided any specificity. And what we're trying to do, and I feel like Councilor Hightower and I have been saying, is let's give examples of what we're going to do, but let's not lock ourselves in. And it still feels like we are locking ourselves in, and I get it. I don't want this to die before it reaches the full council. So that's an.
And I'm going to admit that we're locking ourselves in, and I think at this point that we need to do that to accommodate a batch of our property owners who want to plan ahead for the use of the property. So I'm not denying that it locks us in, and that is a downfall of the way our state governance is, but I can't undo that, so.
Mhm.
That's a whole other campaign to be had.
Mhm. Yeah. This is challenging. I'll admit it. We have to make a decision at some point here. Councilor Hightower, what are your thoughts?
I am at the same compromise that I proposed to Sarah initially, which broke down on, which is I am willing to put like that these will be exemptions as long as we can keep the family one as a may for now.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't do that in the sense that, I mean, that's one that we heard a lot about, you know. I want my son to move there. I want to move there. I want my mother to move there. And it's one that I don't feel is, you know, and they got to certify it. And, you know, I don't feel like it's so going to be abused. I mean, if we have adequate notice, relocation possibility, you know, it's not so much different than the other ones, I guess. It's a legitimate reason.
I do feel
Well,
better with us having this, as long as we keep the second part about these exemptions will not restrict.
Mhm.
It makes me feel better knowing that. I think the only thing that makes it hard is it's like what's a may versus what's a shall. It's like I wouldn't want to pass the family thing without saying that you have to have relocation things, and saying they'll definitely be excluded without being able to say they definitely will then also have to provide relocation expenses is a little tough for me, but I don't know. But
do we have suggested language for this, what we're debating right now, the issue of, I thought we had it, but I don't see it here.
We do, it's there.
Oh, it is there, okay.
this is Sarah's
Oh, right,
language.
that's right, we just did that, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just about which one of these we use.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I have a question that came in.
Do you want to go on to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, actually, there's one other provision which I also propose including, that the ordinance shall provide for a reasonable probationary period for initial occupancy. That's, I don't know where, but I put it down further, but, and part of what I did, which is a little confusing, is I just tried to reorder the paragraphs a little bit for a little bit of flow, but it was at the sort of at the bottom. It was the end of the end of this paragraph.
Sorry, I was editing a little bit. So I think, Brian, just wanted to make sure you did prefer this language, making it clear that it was just cause, or no? So really the only thing we're still talking about is having may or shall or nothing here.
Yeah, I prefer that language at the top there, yeah.
Okay, good. And then Sarah, you're now saying, you're talking about the probationary period?
Right, so that was really the last sentence. We've sort of moved the notice. So the sentence is, this ordinance shall provide for a reasonable probationary period for initial occupancy. If you'll recall, based on what has happened in California and Oregon, I had 1 year, but I'm willing to make that open.
I'm okay with this as well. I will never be okay with it being a year, but I think I could get behind it being 90 days or 120 days.
Do we confuse it a little bit with the use of the words for initial occupancy? Is that really what we need to say there? Because it sounds like the ordinance shall provide for a reasonable probationary period for after initial occupancy. That's it. Okay.
Okay.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
That helps. Okay. I think you've done it the way you worded it.
Right.
Appreciate the wordsmithing and suggestions coming in from members of the public. We were going to give folks an opportunity to weigh in, but I think we have an obligation to finish our work because the council is counting on us now. So how do you want to handle that? I'll stay later if we have to.
Well, and as you know, I have a 6 o'clock commitment.
Okay.
And I don't mind re-meeting again, or even if we could squeak an hour in later this week, whatever. It sounds like we need to have a conversation with Eileen to tidy up her thinking. And I'm not sure the best approach.
Can you help me? Maybe it's the way I'm looking at my screen, but I don't see the language that gives turn the essentially family member moving in language. I don't see it here. Is it just somewhere else on the?
It is not here yet.
Oh, it's not here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have some suggested language from Earhart saying, shall the city.
That's on the first paragraph.
Oh, the very beginning. I see.
So maybe we can go back to that one. I'd like to finish these others. So then the fourth paragraph, there's a change. So I had proposed some language on the rent increase, and I'm okay with that. The intent being that if somebody unreasonably tries to raise your rent, there'll be provisions for how to limit that. And yeah, I think that's. Oh, the only other thing. Oh no, I think it's all in there. Yeah, no, that's okay. It's all in there. And then the last paragraph, I'm fine with. I added, and I didn't mean it, is to say that we're not going to change the notice periods that already exist in law, like whatever they are. But for these new just cause provisions, we can define them. So that was all my intent was, and I just added it. I said as consistent with city and state law, but maybe it's the reverse, which is not inconsistent with.
I feel like that. I mean, we can put it in, but I feel like that's implied.
Yeah,
okay, I'm fine with that. Then that's not really, wasn't really intending to.
I think it's given, and we don't want to complicate this language. It's already extremely complicated. I don't want it in there.
Okay. And then the last sentence I had in my original thing, I had a list of exclusions, which were things like hospitals and dorms. And Soraya pointed out that those residential agreements are already defined in 9 VSA subsection 4452, and we can all go look it up, but it's the same sections that exempt you from landlord-tenant law.
Yeah, those are not residential units, basically.
Right. So I just put that in there to be clear that those things would not be excluded or included.
What are they called? Residential rental agreements, though?
Yep. That if you look up 9 VSA, that's what it refers to.
But that's a strange use of those words. That just sounds really odd. I think the average reader will see that and say, what are you doing? You're not covering residential rental agreements?
Yeah, that it reads strange.
Yeah.
I think it makes it really confusing. I'm very confused by it.
Sarah, remind me, the exemptions as listed, those are exemptions, or are they I forgot what the beginning
Definition.
part of that.
Those are exemptions. This is like hotels will not be included at all. Hospitals, this will not.
Right, no, I'm asking in the state, in the language.
Oh.
Are they exemptions in there, or what are? I forgot what the beginning part of that is.
I guess I got to look it up. As I understand it, it may be exemptions from landlord-tenant law.
Yeah, I
So
think
it
it should
be
just
better to put the same exemptions as something like that.
Because we will use exemptions up there, I was trying to refer to these more as exclusions.
And I think it'd be much clearer. It would be clearer to the average reader, the voter, if we said that uses that are already exempt from landlord-tenant law would still be exempt, and that's hospitals,
Yes.
Nursing homes, right?
Yeah.
So that's
So
what
the state law excludes these. So I would want to say this shall exclude the same. One second, let me go back to the actual.
It does say residential rental agreements. I mean, that's what they're called, but.
Right, but this is an exclusion to those.
Yeah.
So we don't want to say shall include these things as defined.
Yeah.
As shall. I don't know what it is, but.
I think we got to tell the attorney what we're trying to do and let them do it.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. No, we didn't want it to cut. This is written in a way that made me really not comfortable. Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah.
I did want to leave in, but not limited to, just to give ourselves some flexibility.
I feel like we do that with these exemptions already.
Well, no, actually, in this one, I'll tell you where you'll run into problems. Things like sober houses and stuff. There's already been a huge argument about a discussion. So I just want us to. It's a different kind of exemption, or it's really not an exclusion, but it just allows us, if we have a type of specialty house, like in my original thing had specialty housing, which wasn't defined either, but you might have an apartment situation that's programmatic.
So it's connected to something like substance abuse treatment. And it's a treatment program.
Yeah. So I think we just need to give ourselves, even these days, hospitals have, hospice housing. I mean, so I'm just leaving us a little breathing room, and that we could add an exclusion from the just cause.
Aren't those things already exempt from landlord-tenant law? So wouldn't this just be really easy to just copy what they do?
It's not clear when you get into those programs. That's why there is, I think, with the sober houses, there's been a huge discussion about that in this legislature. And I think they may be carved out. I don't know if they're carved out or not. Legal Aid spent a ton of time on that. But so it just gives us the ability to do it. I don't think it requires us to do it.
Okay.
That can be a may.
Uh-huh.
I mean.
Hey, we got a may.
Yeah.
Take it. Let's take it.
Well, actually, no. The may was the not limited to. I think we do. We need to. The amendment shall exclude those things, and I don't know how to add this, but is not limited to them or whatever.
Yeah.
So this isn't final language.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just responding to the chat. So basically, we just want to have something in here that says the same exclusions in BSA and 9.
Yeah. Right.
And so we're going to ask the city attorney to write this sentence.
Yeah.
But I also want us to have some ability to add exclusions if we want to.
Yeah, I put that in my note.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just say that because I think we do have to wrap up soon so that Sarah can be, so hopefully we can be finished, that we are going to ensure, I will be, if I'm involved in this ordinance, I hope to be, but if I'm around, I'm going to push that we don't have wide open exemptions that allow for abuse, and you could, they're so big you could drive a tractor trailer through them. We just, I think, have to just tell repeat it to one another that we're not looking to create something that has so many holes in it that is really just a symbolic gesture. That's not going to really make a difference. I just wanted to be upfront about that.
Okay.
So Brian, just in terms of, so I know what to do with these. All of these are ultimately, what we're going to be doing, it sounds like, is making amendments to my amendments as it's currently tabled. And so I'm not sure what to do with these may or shalls.
Well, this is a procedure. Can you withdraw your amendment?
We have to vote on it.
Yeah.
And I will vote yes on it. So we can't, it says that because it already had, or the city attorney said that because we already had a second, we have to vote on the amendment one way.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Without amendments to the amendment?
No, so what we can do first is make amendments to the amendment.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what I'm
so these are supposed, this is why I started with my language, is these will be the amendments to the amendments, but, which is why I started from mine, but we can't amend to something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you? You're just adding, I mean, you're saying you have your amendment and I'm going to say, I want to change these words and I want to add these words. I mean, those are all, they can be added to your, it's messy.
Oh, I see. So that, okay. I think that makes, so we're not proposing this wholesale as like one change, but that we'll go through bit by bit and say.
We'll go through the whole thing, yeah.
Okay.
And I should just mention, we used to have a thing called friendly amendments, but there was a ruling at some point that it's not really, we can't really do it that way. So we don't operate that way as a council.
I mean, what we have to do is, in a better format than this, I think, is get this done line by line. I mean, the other process is to take it through and see where it lands. That's awkward, but
get too far into process. We did say we would have public forum at 5:30, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, we did. We missed it by 15 minutes. So I think we got to get some feedback on what we've come up with.
Are we going to try to adjourn after Eileen looks at this?
What do you mean, keep this meeting open then and have, is that what you mean? Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's the way to do it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so again, that was a very deliberative and I think productive conversation. We, that's the sausage making in, that is sometimes, not as, doesn't always go so well, but I think we're getting someplace here. It may not please everybody, but I believe in trying to find a way forward that gets us most of what we're looking for, and hopefully this will get us there. So let's open up, Christine, to comments for public forum, and we'll go, if Zariah, are you okay with going 30 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, up first I have Stephen Marshall.
Okay, Stephen, you're ready to go. If you hit your mute button, we'll be together here. You're all set.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Boy, what a marathon. First thing I want to ask is that you guys try a little harder to get the working text out by email or onto the city website, because I was clueless. I had no idea what to prepare for. I had no idea what kind of things you were going to talk about. The text I had was no text. That would be my first comment. Please try to get it out to us so we can be part of the conversation.
Quite well taken. Thank you.
Otherwise, it's just been a tour de force. I just want to say this argument that you need to have all this detail in there to make it possible for voters to know what they're voting on. It's a pile. If I went into a voting booth and tried to read all this, and I was just, okay, am I being too unhumble to say I'm a pretty smart person? I might be able to get through this. 9/10 of Vermont voters, of Burlington voters, are going to look at that and go, a bunch of bullshit. You don't need a complicated ordinance. All you have to do is say, City of Burlington shall have the power by ordinance to regulate this, that, and that. And then it's you are entitled, once this thing is passed through the city council, to make your argument to the public. You do not need to be deciding these things in this context. You need to be defining the powers that you want and let the voters decide if they want to let you have those powers. I conclude.
Thank you, Stephen. Christine, one of the persons in line asked if he could speak because he has to attend a meeting at 6 as well. I don't know if I think it was Erhard.
Yeah, I have him up next.
Oh, okay.
Just for clarification, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission is having a big sort of housing summit tonight. So while I hate to leave this, I think that's where some of us are going. And just an editorial comment, I'm promoting statewide housing code inspection. So if you think Burlington has it bad, you ought to be in the other 200 towns that have no housing code inspection.
That's a low bar, but yeah. Go ahead, Erhard.
Hey, thanks. Hope I didn't jump ahead of too many people. I'm not going to engage with Stephen. I respectfully disagree and think you guys are headed in a good direction. I just quickly wanted to let you know that I still have a problem with that first paragraph. I know Sarah is okay with it, but I really worry about the broadness of the language. That basically, if I read this, fine. If I read it closely, it basically tells me that you're asking to receive the power to change all of landlord-tenant law. And I think that's overly broad, and I think you're going to run into trouble with that. If not in the when you bring this to the voters, but certainly when you get to the legislature, you do not want to be, I think, implying that you're seeking the power to broadly change landlord-tenant law in other ways than what you've now very carefully specified. And I did post some suggested language in the chat, and specifically what I'm referring to is in the second line where it says that that the Burlington City Acts be as amended be further amended to give the city the power to provide by ordinance the conditions under which evictions may occur. And if you kind of stop right there and pause there for a second and read that in by itself, it's very, very broad. It basically says you're asking for the power to rewrite landlord-tenant law. I would, at a minimum, suggest that you, in your questions to Eileen, ask her if she is worried about this and if she might concur with that reading. And if she isn't worried, fine. I would obviously defer to her, but if she agrees that it's potentially problematic when it comes to legislature, like I said, I posted some alternate language. I can also email it to you. It's not super elegant, but it cuts out the part that I think is potentially problematic.
Thank you very much. Please send that to us by email. And Zaraya,
Yep.
did you get a note in the document? I thought I saw you writing a note to highlight that and call it out for Eileen.
Yeah, I started. I was going back to grab Earhart's thing, but I guess I'm
Okay.
just, I guess for my own kind of education, if you don't mind, because to me it's specific to evictions, which is generally what I thought we were doing. So I guess I'm curious as to why you're worried.
Well, I mean, I think there are other provisions around evictions that you may not exactly be covering.
Yeah, it's a big piece of law.
Yeah. In my experience of working with landlord tenant law for probably over 30 years at this point, and I'm not a lawyer, but I spend a lot of time defending tenants' rights when people come in to try and get this changed, and there are always unintended consequences that you have not thought of because it's complicated, and there's so many different situations between landlords and tenants that you're trying to cover. So I would just, this is in the spirit of trying to, make it less complicated and less open, open to misinterpretation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, you guys.
We're not done yet. Okay, Christine.
Next up, we have Christy.
Christy Delphia, you're up next.
Hello, everybody.
Hi
I'm
there.
going to agree with Stephen. All of this writing to put on a bill to the voters in March is going to be seriously confusing for a whole host of people. I think the most basic of things put on that for them to vote on is going to be the easiest way for people to understand and get this passed. Why we are still sitting here arguing over this language that could be changed at any point in time by the legislature is just beyond me. It's confusing, it's seriously frustrating, and I don't think it's necessary. Neither do our tenants. Our tenants want to see this made much stronger than what it is. As for what is written right here in front of us right now, the only exemptions that we would like to see is the owner occupied for anything under three buildings. That's it. But as it's written, if that's the only way it's going to pass, then so be it. But you need to keep your bill writing to a minimum so that voters don't get confused and this actually passes. Because if you make it too complicated, they're just going to look at it and say, what? No, that we can't be back here again in another 2 or 4 years, because then it'll be seen as completely failed, if you know what I mean, and nobody will want to try for it again. So we definitely don't want to discourage people by writing something that's too long and not easy to understand when we go look at it in the ballot box.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thank you, Christy. Christine, who do you have next?
Next, Tom Proctor.
Okay, Tom, you're up.
Hey folks, just give me a moment, just need to exit my full screen. So good evening. Obviously we're back in CDNR. Thanks for once again trying to hammer through this. This has been a super long and just an exhaustive process for everyone. I'd like to say I broadly agree with what Stephen said earlier on. This has just got more and more complicated as it's gone on, and not only is it likely to be very confusing, for voters. I think we've all heard in the past. I mean, I think one great example of this is the proposition that went through in California this November, where they basically said that gig workers weren't proper workers and therefore not entitled to things like healthcare. The actual bill itself was incredibly long, super convoluted, and was written by lobbyists, and basically people weren't sure what they were voting for, and I'm really worried that we're getting into that territory ourselves. Myself, Christy on the phone, Stephen on the phone, Erhard on the phone, Jean, all of you, we have been poring over this language for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and yet it's still confusing to us. So God knows what it's going to be like when you go into a polling booth and see for the first time in March. You'll have no idea what it's talking about if you're not aware of what's going on. And honestly, most people aren't going to be aware of what's going on. We are going to try and push this as much as possible. We've got a great campaign to try and get this pushed as much as possible, to talk to as many voters as possible. But it is COVID. A lot of people are low information voters as it is. It's going to be tough getting this out into the wider public and having them understand what's going on here. Burlington and the council needs broad powers to regulate evictions. The more exceptions baked into this just cause charter change language, the more our hands are tied later down the line. And these exceptions will be used and abused by landlords. I think there is quote unquote good landlords out there, but I think we all know that there is plenty of slumlords in Burlington. I think we all know there is plenty of landlords with an exceptional amount of power and resources that will use those resources in order to find loopholes and exploit loopholes. Some of these landlords are sitting on $70 million worth of property. They have some of the best lawyers. They will challenge this if we start putting shalls rather than mays into the language, because they have the resources to do so. People that don't have the resources are 60% of Burlington residents, otherwise known as the tenants of Burlington. They don't have those resources. If we allow for if we bake in these exceptions right now, these landlords will find loopholes, and they will use those loopholes, and they will use them to evict people so they can up rents, so they can renovate and push up rents in Burlington, or they can push out people who can't afford to live in the areas that they own. Another concern is if this measure is, if this language is agreed on right now and it goes to Montpelier, we've already heard from Erhard that Montpelier is not as good at tenant protections on landlords than Burlington City Council. If they read that we have already agreed to provisions, they will add more provisions, and it will get to the point where this whole charter change will become pointless, and it will not be good enough for its intended purpose, and it's going to make it harder later down the line to try and fix it, because according to Montpelier, we've already passed tenant protections in Montpelier, so they're not going to want to try and do it again. There's not going to be the political appetite to want to do it again in Burlington, let alone Montpelier. I really appreciate the work that you've put in, Sarah, that you've put in, Brian, that Zariah's put in. I know how much you guys have all been working on this, because Christ, I've been working on it as well. We've put in a phenomenal amount of work, all of us. Don't get tunnel vision at this point. Look at the broader picture. We need this in to protect tenants. I think we can all agree that. So don't end up making this so diluted and so watered down that it actually does the opposite effect, and means that it's harder in the future to actually pass real tenant protections, because according to Montpelier, or according to the city, we've already done it. And in fact, this language won't actually do that. Sorry. Thank you again for really working on this. I really do appreciate it. I really do hope we somehow thread the needle, but don't lose the forest for the trees, because otherwise it really is going to make it harder for tenants down the line. Thanks.
I'm gonna.
Thank you. I just want
leave
to see
you
this.
now.
Oh yeah, you have to step outside. Yep.
So I'll try to catch up with it on Zoom, and
Yes.
we can see what the city attorney has to say, and go from there in the next 2 days.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Yep.
Go back to public forum. Christine, do you have more folks looking to speak?
Yes, P.O. Murphy.
Okay. I see you there, Patrick. I think you're ready.
Hi there. Thanks very much to all three of you for the work. I'm sorry that I've missed Sarah here, but I did want to thank you for the work that you're doing on this. I am very frustrated by the debate here over shall versus may, because I think that what you're trying to do generally is to create some possibilities with the city council to be able to make laws that protect tenants. And to then narrow that before you even get to that point, to not be able to address those situations where a family member might want to move in, you might want to renovate a unit. There are ways to exploit these exemptions, and that have been exploited in other jurisdictions and communities. And so to prevent the city council from being able to make provisions that will protect against that will act as a counterbalance to that, doesn't make much sense to me. We're having a debate here. There's clearly a divide among the three of you. There's likely a divide among the entire city council, but I think that also speaks to a broader divide among the city itself. And why shouldn't we have that debate, both at the city council and with this charter change proposal generally? I can't see the logic behind limiting what you're trying to do when this is the whole purpose behind it. And if you get 2 to 3 years on and you find out, well, this is actually what the will of the people are, or what the will of the people is right now, 3 years from now, you wouldn't be able to enact that within the ordinance process. And now you have to go back, and it's now another 2 or 3 years. And in the meantime, people have been displaced. I don't see the logic in that. And I hope that the city council can really push past this to just get something for people to vote up or down on, so that you can start the process and allow that debate that's clearly, happening here, but will happen among all members of the community and then on the city council floor. Allow that debate to happen. There are several other stages to this where there'll be all kinds of transparency and ability for people to weigh in. And I'm sure the landlords will have the ability to do that. And if, tenants will have the same. Hopefully, if we can be notified in the same way that Councilor Shannon's notifying the landlords. But I do believe that we can get to a point where there's a discussion at the city council level to really push changes that are needed here. And I have to say, this hang up on the one word of shall seems to be catering to one group of people before the process has been given a chance to play out. And that's all I say at this moment. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Christine, how many more folks do we have? Because I just want to keep track of time. We have about 10 minutes left.
I have no one else in the queue to speak.
Oh, okay. Okay. I should have asked for a straw poll from those in the audience. We are trying to reach an agreement that allows this question to go on the ballot, period. So there's that saying that the perfect is often the enemy of the good. I just want to find out what the sense is of the audience, really, if we should, holding fast to the simplest version, which I preferred, and Councillor Hightower, I think I can speak for him, says would have preferred a simpler version that didn't have a long list of exemptions. If that means not having a question that gets enough votes to be on the ballot in March, is that what people would rather see us do? Because I think ultimately it'll come down to a question of, do people feel that the compromise that we're making is just not worth it, and we ought to just scrap it and come back to it in the future? Because it will be a year. Voters only vote in March next year. There's no November election in between, so there's no opportunity. So this is a process that we are engaged in. We're trying to get some progress, and I think I would just say I'd like to hear from people whether or not we should insist on language that doesn't tie us up, and if that results in not getting enough votes, then I'd just like to hear what people think about that. So. Councillor Hightower, do you have any words of wisdom?
No, I've definitely, I feel like I've drawn in a hard line in how much I'm willing to compromise in order to get this through. It is scary at the idea of not having it be on the March ballot. I do think that I'm glad that we added the language of like that we have the specific authority to mitigate negative impacts. That makes me feel better. But I guess the other thing I'm also worried about, this is maybe a question to Brian, and happy to pause that if other folks have questions on that first question, but I have thoughts on that first question, but it is very long. It's gotten so long. And what is our ability to pare it down for the ballot? So that
we can have
it seems like, Councillor Carpenter is trying to satisfy a small group of landlords with some of these changes who, want to make sure that that's in the charter change, but I don't know that every voter needs to read all of this.
Yeah,
so.
there is an ability to create an abbreviated version. We have in the past had abbreviated versions, but you have to provide every voter with the full version as well. So I got to ask the city attorney, but I think you can do essentially an accompanying document that goes with the ballot. Will have the full language on it, and then here's a cheat sheet to tell you what it actually says.
That doesn't seem helpful.
No.
That's just more words, not less words.
Yeah. Although it's usually much shorter, so it usually takes this much text and turns it into a few sentences. So it doesn't go into more detail.
What to do with that.
Yeah. Well, we had our work session, we had our forum, we have some minutes, we still have a quorum. So the minutes, if you could just tell me again, what's the date on those minutes? Do you see, Christine, maybe?
Yeah, it was from our last meeting. So we just have one set of minutes to approve. November 10th minutes.
Okay. All right. Councillor Hightower, would you move approval of the minutes from November 10th, 2020?
Let me skim them right quick. Yes, I would. So moved.
All right. I'm in favor. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. We have accomplished that task. Setting up our next meeting, it looks like we may have a bit of a tight deadline to meet here, at least based on the city attorney's advice. The city council, wait a minute, did she say we need to have a decision final on this question by December 21? Or maybe December 20. So that was actually up for debate. Councillor Freeman asked and said, I thought it was actually the 21st or 22nd. There was a little bit of debate back and forth. So
yeah, somebody, I think at the city said the 20th, and Jean Bergman and Perry Freeman thought it was the 21st. So it's a question of if it's the next meeting
Okay.
or not.
So those are obviously that makes a big difference because we have a meeting on December 21st. The 20th, of course, is a Sunday. So we could theoretically call a special meeting the week before to deal with this issue. The week of the 14th. Because we I guess we could schedule another meeting on. We have some pretty big commitments for the next few nights. At least this counselor does, and I think Counselor Hightower has some as well. So I don't think another nighttime meeting this week is in the works.
What would you hope to achieve with another meeting?
We'd have actual language, final language to look at before we bring it back to the council as an amendment.
So I don't think we're going to get past that mayor shall.
Yeah.
And I at least have, I have the changes that we discussed. I went ahead and incorporated Earhart's for the first one without you or Sarah. So that first paragraph, just taking out the part about evictions, just because I assumed both of you would be okay with that, given the reasoning he gave. But other than that, I have it kind of as we saw it. I can make time on Friday, but to some extent, I do feel like eventually we're just going to have to vote on the mayor shall. I don't think that we will come to a majority vote on CDNR, but we won't come to consensus, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Yeah, this Friday would probably be the best time for me as well. So, try and find a time during the day on Friday the 4th. Are you flexible during the day or not really?
No.
So if you did a Friday, it would have to be evening?
Yeah, I'd be free. I could probably do starting at like 4
o'clock.
But
okay.
The other thing is just I could just send the document as it is to the council and have it posted.
To meet the deadline. Yeah.
And then we can make those amendments, one at a time after city attorney review, and vote yay or nay on them.
Oh, I see. So rather than ask the city attorney to hurry up and make the language changes for tomorrow, I think they can well, I don't know this. Typically they can do it in time for the packet on Thursday if they get it tomorrow. So let's do that and see if we can at least, get us maybe 98% of the way there. Okay. If needed, if it's helpful in this process, we will try to reconvene 4 o'clock on Friday, this Friday the 4th, only if that's going to advance the conversation. But if we're still stuck, I don't know if it really warrants having a meeting to say we're stuck.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And then the other thing to that would be is I think only if the city attorney if we want to talk about specific language with the city attorney. So if nobody from that office is available, then I would be hesitant to have a meeting.
No, I'd have to have them. I agree. Absolutely. Okay. All right. I'll check in with Eileen to see if she's even available or someone's available on Friday at 4. And if you could share with her the document we've created together, that'd be great.
Great. Should I share it with the whole council?
Not yet, I don't think. I think it's better to get the city attorney to wordsmith it and get the wording right.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah. But it'll go in the packet this week for next Monday.
And Brian, I'll need to know a decision on that Friday meeting by Wednesday afternoon at the latest, because I need 48 hours to warn the meeting properly.
Sure. Thanks for the reminder. I think tomorrow, we'll know tomorrow, basically.
Okay, great.
Yeah. All right. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
I moved.
Moved, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 6:15. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.